But the way that we put the data together this year for MCAS and accountability, we did a little bit different. You can see that on the left side of the table, you have the grade level, you have the content, and then you have the meeting, exceeding, partially meeting, or not meeting. If you go to that one column over, you'll see it's the 24 BMR-SD results. The next column is the 23 BMR-SD results. So you can see year over year how we did. And then you'll see the 2024 state results. And so the colors are connected to how we did compared to the state. So if something is shaded in green, it means that we beat the state average collectively. So when I say collectively, I mean exceeding and meeting is how the numbers are actually added and put together. So you'll notice that in grade 3 ELA, we had 50% of our students are meeting or exceeding state level expectations. Statewide for grade 3 ELA, we were at 42%. So we far exceeded the state average. Again, not that that's the ultimate threshold, but it's a really good benchmark to see if our kids are on target. So green is good. That means that we beat the state. And then, of course, on the opposite end of that, for not meeting, if it is green, that means we are lower than the state average, right? Because we want fewer kids in that category. You'll notice I didn't highlight the partially meeting, not because those students are not important. They're very, very important. But as far as how the district is measured on its progress toward our goals, those exceeding and meeting numbers and the not meeting numbers are weighted heavily. So I'm just calling those out. So you can see as compared to the state how we did in grade 3 ELA. We exceeded the state averages quite significantly for ELA. And then also our warning rate is half of the state's warning rate in third grade. So it's also, if you look at the 2023 results in the column right next to it, you'll see that we were at 12% last year. This year we're at 9%. When the results were released, I did email this out to folks so that you do have I'm sure most of you already have seen this already.
And it's linked in his evidence.
Yeah. For grade 3 math, again, you can see our exceeding and meeting percentages exceeded the state's. The state was at 45% meeting and exceeding, and we were at 56%. So again, quite a significant difference. And the state average for not meeting was at 20. We were at 13. So that gives you a general sense. Similar story in fourth grade. You can see beat the state averages for meeting and exceeding, and now you're seeing our student growth percentile, right? The target was 50, we were at 51. So you can start to see a little bit more data is incorporated as we go through. Looking at fourth grade math, again, exceeding the state averages for meeting and exceeding the state averages for not meeting. Fifth and sixth grade is where we started to have a problem in our student performance this year. So if we pause in fifth grade for a minute, now you're starting to see the red. So you can see that the state actually outperformed the district. So for fifth grade ELA, we took a big step back last year, not only as it relates to how we performed against the state, but how we performed against ourselves from the prior year. And so you can see at fifth grade ELA, as a state overall, they were at 38% meeting or exceeding, which is really low. We were lower than that. We were at 30. We didn't have any students in the exceeding category. And I'll talk about what we're doing about this in a minute. But I think a more important story to tell is look at what happened from 2023 to 2024. We were at 49% of our class was at meeting or exceeding, whereas in 23, we were at 30%. So again, different kids, but it's still important to note. The other piece that I really want to call out is our low student growth in this particular grade in this subject. So the kids didn't move. Sometimes you'll see low achievement, but a higher student growth. That means that the kids grew, right? So for whatever reason, that particular class is struggling, but they're showing a lot of progress. This story is one that is of great concern because not only did the kids not achieve, but they didn't grow. So that was last year's fifth grade students. Those are our current sixth grade students. So we are now at the process, just so you know, not only have we done the beginning of year assessing, but we are looking at this MCAS data by grade, by class, excuse me, within each grade. So you can actually run section by section reports. So I can see all of the, this particular class. I can see each of the fifth grade teachers. I can see each of the individual kids, the strands and the standards, and the question types. What percentage of those question types the kids got correct and which ones they didn't. Like, we are in the weeds as deep in this as we can get to figure out what the heck happened here. And those of you that have been following our fifth grade results for the past few years, this hasn't happened before. So if you are surprised, I think you're right to be. A lot of us, when we saw this, is like, what the heck? That is not a grade that we have had this issue with in the past. Fifth grade math. So this is interesting, right? So now you can see our SGP is at 51. We came in a little bit lower in fifth grade with our performance for meeting and exceeding than we did in 2023. It's yellow because we're within 5 points of the state averages. So we're within striking distance to where the state is. Look at the not meeting. So we're at 5% of our kids not meeting this year versus 14% at the state level. So quite a significant difference there. But you can see that our kids grew in the 51st percentile. So this is a story that says we made some progress. They grew where we wanted them to grow, at least from the kind of the benchmark perspective, but did not do as well as we were hoping. And you're going to see that when we look in sixth grade. If we want to scroll down to grade 6, which is right underneath that. Actually, before we do that, Tim, can you scroll right here to just scroll down a little bit to science? There's a really great story to tell with our science scores across the district. Look at the difference as far as our meeting and exceeding numbers in science. We went from 42% to 55% in 1 year. But look at the difference compared to the state. We have 20% of our kids in fifth grade statewide that are failing the science exam compared to our 8%, which again, we're not happy about the 8%, but it is far less than this overall state average. It's about on par with where we were in 2023. But again, we're 55% meeting and exceeding compared to the state's 44%. That's a significant difference. So there's good news to tell in some of this data and a lot of the data. So an important highlight in our accountability targets, again, we were talking about that. The complex met 58% of the overall student goals. So they set an aggregate goal, and then they set your lowest performing student goal. So we got 58% of all the student goals that were set, and we got 76% for the lowest performing kids. That speaks to a very strong multi-tiered systems of support or response to intervention model that you've heard the complex or Jenny talk about before. So now we segue down into grade 6. This, again, was a story that confused a lot of us, because if you know that cohort of students, those were the fifth graders last year that had such strong results. So like I mentioned with the fifth grade results, we are in the weeds of looking at the specific sections, the students, the standards. We're doing the same thing with grade 6, because again, if you look at the SGPs, they are incredibly low. They're some of the lowest we have. So this says not only did the kids not perform, they didn't grow. But I will say that this sixth grade in English and math is one of the few places that this happened. So fifth grade ELA was the other, and sixth grade was another place. And you can see compared to the state, they were far below where the state averages are. But if you look at grade 6 math, you can see we bested the state, but not by a significant amount. And frankly, when you look at the not meeting percentages from 2023 to 2024, they increased. So a lot of work to do in grade 6 in terms of figuring out what happened. If we scroll to grade 7, you'll see a bit of a different story. So we are within striking distance compared to the state, which is one piece of the story. But look at where we are in 2024 compared to where we were in 2023. So in 2023, we had 20% of our 7th graders meeting or exceeding expectations. In 2024, we're at 33%. So that's a huge increase. Look at the not meeting rates. We are at 23% in 2023 to last year we were at 23% at 2023 to last year we were at 19%. So we saw a decrease there, and we're also below the state as well for 2024. Math is similar. You can see we went from, if you look at the 23 results, we are at 27% meeting and exceeding, and last year we were at 35%. So we saw a nice increase there. And look at the drop in warning rate. We were at 23% warning. We dropped that down to 9. But look at the state warning rate. State warning rate was at 19%. We were at 9. So I know there's a lot of numbers and such for particularly. I know the school committee has seen this kind of data a bunch of times for our families at home, but you really have to look at all of it to get the true picture. Anybody can pick up a number and say, "Oh, these achievement rates are so low. This is atrocious." And
It's a lot of information, and I think what's important to know is, like you just said, you get it down to the student.
Yep.
And can narrow into the classrooms, and when the state puts it out and you go to DESI's website, you're looking at the district. You're like I think it's important to know that this is Jason's presentation to us, and he dwindled down the numbers for us, because it would be impossible for us to see but also important to note that it shows that he's really focused on figuring out where the deficits are and how to, help those classrooms and students grow. So I appreciate this data, because when you do look at the snapshots of districts, you're not getting this. You're not, and this just shows that Jason's digging into the student, and we have over 1,500 of them, so it's a lot. It's a lot of numbers, and it's hard to understand to the layperson. So time and effort is noted here.
When we shift to 8th grade tells a really interesting story. So if you look at the 8th grade ELA, you see red, and red is not good. It means we were below the state averages. I want to draw your attention to our student growth, though. So you can see our SGP in grade 8 ELA was 51. So this is an example of what I was talking about, where the overall achievement isn't where we want it to be, but the kids are growing. So if you look at in 2023, our 8th graders were at 25% meeting or exceeding. In 2024, our 8th graders are at 30%. So we saw an increase in meeting and exceeding rates, which is great. Our not meeting numbers were at 30%. That's high. It's a little bit lower than where it was the year before, but it's above the state average. So we colored it red. But this is one of those where you need, to Erin's point, you have to have all the numbers to get a real picture, because the kids also grew in the 51st percentile. That means that they outgrew half of their peers that had the same score as them the year prior. That's actually good. So this is an indicator that shows the kids are making progress. They're on the right track. These are our current freshmen. And then look at mathematics, right? So if you look at the mathematics results, we went from, in 2023, we had 19% of our kids meeting or exceeding, to last year we were at 34%. And as a state, they're at 39%. So we're about 4% away from where the state averages are. Look at our not meeting percentages. We went from 34% of our kids in 2023 not meeting to 9%. That is tremendous. And the state averages for 2024 is 19%. We're at 9%. So we're far below where the state average is. And look at the SGP. They grew in the 61st percentile. That means they outperformed 61% of their peers that had the same score as them the year before.
This is a class we've been watching for years.
These are
right?
freshmen now.
Mm-hmm. But this has been the notorious, like,
that went through middle school with what's going on. So this shows just that bottom 9 not meeting. It shows that something changed, something was implemented, and it improved all of the work that was put into digging into these numbers from 3 years ago. It shows the growth for our teachers, really.
And one of the shifts we did to help on both ends, the teachers, was we did school embedded tutoring in grade 8. We targeted specifically. So there was virtual tutoring, there was in-person tutoring. And remember, the grade 8 academy students moved over to the high school in the morning. It made those classes smaller. So they actually had fewer students in their classes that they could do more targeted work with, just for the first couple of periods of the day. So that was good to see. And you can see the growth in the 61st percentile. That's tremendous. That they exceeded what would be expected of them. And then if you scroll a little bit down, Tim, if you just scroll just a little down, you'll see the science results. And I think this is important to note as well. If you look at our science scores, you will see they are up significantly. So they're at 19% meeting or exceeding in 2023. Last year, we're at 35%. That's tremendous growth. And we're about 5% below where the state is. Or 6%, what is that? Is that 5%? Yeah. So we are close to the state average as far as that, but it's highlighted in yellow because we're 5% off. But look at the not meeting numbers. If you scroll down a little bit lower, Tim, you'll see the other direction there. There you go. Keep going. Right here. So you'll see we went from 43% not meeting, which is completely unacceptable, and I think everybody would agree with that, to 14%. So that's a huge decrease. And the state average was 20% not meeting, we were at 14.
Again, a lot of work. And refresh us on what changes were made to our science curriculum to target this too.
So we have adopted for science the McGraw-Hill, core program, and now we're looking this year to even go a step further and augment the labs through this new virtual lab model. That's tremendous.
So that's work from before that he's brought to us, but it is paying off now with time and effort.
Yeah, we're really excited to see this. The results here. And remember, this isn't just 8th grade, right? It's an 8th grade test, but this is assessing grade 6 and 7 as well, which I think is important to note. And a really important data point, and again, to Erin's point, like if you're not digging through the accountability tab, you're not going to see this. Like nobody will know that this is even there, frankly. They just look at the overall achievement. But the middle school met 79% of the student goals set by the Department of Education overall. 79% of those goals. And so I would challenge any other middle school to show that they made that level of progress. You look at one number, and I get it. You look at the achievement number in grade 6, I can understand where people's concerns, but you have to look at where we were from 23 to 24, how we compare to the state, and then what was the actual scaled score target that DESE set for us, and if we met it, and we met almost 80% of those targets. So a shout out to the team that was doing that work. And then we'll shift gears and look at the high school. The high school tells a really interesting story because if you look at the 10th grade ELA scores, they actually exceeded the average scaled score that DESE set for them. So while the overall number of meeting and exceeding is essentially spot on with what it was in 2023, they lifted their scaled scores because you have more kids that are in the exceeding category. So that's a really good news story to tell. You can see we were within 5 points of the state.
1 point.
Yeah, I know. I highlighted it because we were still lower, but of the state average. And then in the not meeting, we went from 9% to 7%, and the state average of the high school 10th grade was at 12%. So BMR is, you can see collectively, the schools are doing good work. We haven't arrived. Nobody's claiming victory or waving a flag, but we're making really good progress. And In math, the concern there was the low SGP. You can see that although again, lifting the number and the percent of kids that are at the exceeding category by 5 points, and again, it's usually about 100 kids, so it's about 5 students. Overall, they actually received three of the 4 of their accountability points for their scaled score. So they made really nice progress there. They beat the state average as far as not meeting just by a point. Something we're looking very closely at are those 12 students in the not meeting. Those students have to test again. So we're in the weeds of finding out what the standards and strands are for that. And then if you scroll down, we're almost done. Thank you for hanging with me here. To the biology. Again, an incredible story to tell. We went from 34%, and remember, that was a smaller N size. That was a smaller group of kids that were tested. Went from 34% to 53%. So a really good news story. But the not meeting kids, we went from 6 to 12. So again, we've got to figure out what the heck happened there, and those kids will retest. But some really good news overall. And then Tim, if you just scroll to the last page, and I promise I'll wrap up with this piece for the data end of it. This is all the accountability data that I was talking about. And I do want to run through this quickly because I think it's important to highlight. Again, the complex met overall 68% of their targets. I'm sorry, the high school met 68%, I should say the high school, 68% of their targets and 15% of their lowest performing students. That's where the work is. One of the pieces of work is that needs to be done. And I think you're going to, and if you heard Jill mention earlier, and I know people talk about charger time, you hear like some kids are coloring and some kids are watching a movie in the auditorium. I would pose very few kids are doing those things. We have only 15% of our lowest performing students met their targets. The students in that bucket are not coloring and watching movies. The students in that bucket are in intervention. We have to lift that bottom. And that's the 12% we were looking at. That's those students. So we've got a lot of work to do.
For me, that raises the question, is charger time long enough?
Right.
Just asking. For that number of,
Yeah. And then the overall, how we did as a district. So overall as a district, we only got 1 out of our 4 points for English language arts achievement. That is the curriculum we are focusing on this year. And you probably heard all of the principals discussing writing and literacy. That is a major focus for us. And our curriculum team this year will show up in my goals, is going to focus on what are some of the kind of the tweaks we need to make to the literacy curriculum, but what specifically in writing do we need to be doing differently. I will tell you, I taught a writing course today in the middle school. It was grade 7. It was great. I taught a 6th grade science and a 7th grade writing class today here to do some coverage for one of the teachers so she could go to some training. We have just squashed the love of writing out of the kids. And I had a long conversation with the kids in that section about it. And so we sort of scrapped what the teacher left. I got in a little bit of trouble with her when she came back, but I did some of the work she asked me to do with them. But we just did some free writing. And it was almost freeing to the kids. Like they just wrote, and they looked at me, they're like, what do you mean we're going to free write? I'm like, well, write what's on your mind, what's on your heart. What are some things you need to discuss? What do you need to get off your chest? What are you worried about? What are you wondering about? And the kids were all like, are you kidding? Do we really get to do this? And we just 15 minutes. That's all we did. It was for 15 minutes. It was amazing. And the kids that were like, well, I don't really know what to write about. I said, well, then write that. They're like, well, what do you mean write that? I'm like, well, write down, I don't know what to write about. So he's like, I don't know what to write about. I'm like, okay. Now, if you did know what to write about, what would you write about? And he's like, that doesn't even make sense. So I'm like, but they started writing. They were talking. It was really a great exercise, and we need to get to more of that. And I think you're going to see more of those opportunities for kids instead of just that structured, rigid. There's a place for that, but that can't be all we do. So I won't run through all of the points, but you can see we did well. We did well overall. Our 4-year graduation, our cohort number, I think is a little misleading. We were like a point off of the target, and we're at almost 90%. And that's the cohort. It's not the annual. It's how many kids started as freshmen and finished as seniors. And these are kids we're accountable for, by the way, that aren't here anymore. Like they've gone to other high schools. But because they started in our cohort, they count in our number. So some of these kids we have no control over. Some of them we can't find. They've gone to 2 or 3 schools, but they started here as freshmen. So if we can't trace them and they're not in the Sims data system for DESE, we own them.
So they could have moved out of state, out of country.
2 high schools later, and but they started with us as freshmen, so they're counted as a withdrawal or a drop if you can't find them.
How many of those do we have?
Not a lot, but there were a few. There were absolutely a few. Jill and I we couldn't trace the kids. We couldn't find them. Jill Fowlis. So again, it's not a lot, but when you have 110 kids in a class, right? Like 3 or 4 kids it's a big percentage. So I thought that was a little kind of bogus because we were like a point away from where we needed to be, and our cohort rate, graduation rate, was just about 90%. So it's not like it was a terrible. So that's a bit misleading. But our dropout rate, I mean, we have that down to, we were like 1.3%, which is so incredibly low. But even that, we're hoping that this year that we're half of that. And that's just individual case management. Our ELL, huge shout out to Jill and the ELL team. They exceeded all the targets that were, far exceeded the targets set for them. We got all of our points there. Our chronic absenteeism, we got all of our points there. We didn't get any points in our advanced coursework because there were a couple of Project Lead the Way and AP courses we didn't run. So those points are accounted for by Project Lead the Way and advanced placement.